Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. And listen, sometimes there are certain stories in my career that I didn't set out pursuing. I think sometimes people perceive my writing and the things that I do from the outside looking in, like I have some agenda and I'm plotting all this stuff. Sometimes I just fall backwards into stories, and this one that we're going to talk about on this episode of Plain Talk is one of them. I didn't know much about the Lights or West Fargo Events or even Epic Companies, really, before I wrote about a situation where Epic Companies was starting a charity in order to sponsor charitable gaming at their various locations. Now, charitable gaming is something that's been interesting to me for a while in North Dakota. We legalized electronic pull tabs that set off an absolute boom in revenues. Earlier this year during the legislative session, one thing that I was writing about was nonprofits, charities, buying for-profit businesses in order to protect their gambling interests. And with the Epic story, I saw it the other way. Here you have a for-profit company starting a nonprofit in order to facilitate gambling. That really interested me. But then from there, I found out that one of the nonprofits that Epic is using for charitable gaming is West Fargo Events. West Fargo Events it works on behalf of city government, manages venues for city governments. It was started by Epic Companies. For years, an Epic Company employee filed the annual reports with the Secretary of State. Incorrectly filed them, by the way, misidentifying misidentifying to the state who is on the board of this nonprofit. Todd Burning, the president of Epic Companies, sits on the board of West Fargo Events, and it all just seemed, frankly, a little cozy to me. So I wrote about it. And then when I wrote about it, and in particular those annual reports that got filed, a gentleman got in touch with me by the name of Jim Bullis. He's a attorney in the Fargo area, specifically West Fargo. He's also a partner in a development company called Eagle Ridge Development. And what they're doing is he was identified as one of the board of directors in those erroneously filings with the Secretary of State's office. He reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm not on the board of this organization. And oh, by the way, I have a story to tell about parking," which I have a story about that up today in the Fargo Forum. And Jim Bullis joins myself and, of course, my co-host Ben Hansen joins us on the show right now. Jim, how you doing?
Good. Thanks, Rob, for having me on.
That was quite the introduction. I went through it, but there's a lot of backstory here, and to me, it's fascinating on the philosophical level because we have a lot of questions about. Starting with the charitable gaming stuff, but then going off, what's the appropriate relationship between government and a nonprofit, and then that nonprofit and for-profit businesses. There's a lot going on here, but your part of it specifically is parking, and that was the story I wrote about today. Tell us a little bit. How were you initially involved in West Fargo Events?
So this whole Lights vision was really Todd Burning. This was, a lot of people played a role, but this was really his vision for, what could be kind of a great event venue for West Fargo. And he set out and had a development plan to get this plaza going and get the parking ramp built. The city set up a TIF district for Todd's, for the property to help finance and facilitate that plaza.
And how long was that TIF, Jim? I'm sorry to interrupt, but how long was that TIF?
I think it was 20. I think it's 20 years.
And is that usual by City of West Fargo or the area standards?
So I don't have this was the only TIF we've ever been involved in.
Okay.
But the rules have changed since this TIF was established. This was set up under the old North Dakota law where a city could set up a 20-year TIF, the maximum. without getting any participation from the county or the school district. This was set up right before the rules changed. And when they did the math, they weren't quite big enough. They didn't have enough tax base in order to get this plaza built the way they wanted to build it. So I was approached by Todd in the city. We had property adjacent to this venue, and they asked if we'd build, something with they had a number in mind of how much they needed built, and it was close to $30 million, which was a big, at the time, and even now, that's a big number for a residential project. But we talked to the city, we talked to our investors, we said, hey, we can do this, but we need, in order to get that big, we're going to use our whole lot for the building and a little bit of parking. We're going to be short. So we're going to need to add a floor to the parking ramp they had designed. So I think Epic built it. Epic added a floor, and we paid the city for that floor. We paid them $1.5 million. And to make it work better for our tenants, we built a skyway from that third floor over to our building so that our tenants could park either under our building or around our building or in the ramp. That's what we felt we needed to make the building a success.
And just so folks know, when we're talking these parking spaces, you're not talking like 6 spots outside of a smaller apartment building. This is
No.
It's not 100. Is it 104 spots total, or how many spots roughly total was it?
So our project, the Northern Lights, is about 195 residential units.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Plus some commercial. So we have 104 spots for our exclusive use in the ramp. 104, whole floor.
So it's 30 million, like you said, is not cheap, but it's not as if this was a small amount of parking you were installing either. I mean, it was a major commercial project.
Oh, this was a big undertaking, and the parking is a critical component to our project.
No, the parking kind of becomes the crux, because I've been writing the stories. Is West Fargo Events too intertwined with Epic companies, and that to this point, at least in my reporting, that's been kind of a theoretical discussion, right? Where should the boundaries be? How intertwined should these two entities be? This is a kind of a practical example, I feel, of what we're talking about, where what you have told me, Jim, is that this West Fargo Events, which manages the parking ramp that was built by Epic but owned by the city of West Fargo, and West Fargo Events manages it. This organization that has Epic Company Todd Burning on its board, that was founded, and Epic Company does the accounting and everything. They have been under the contract, is like a 30-year contract or 35-year, I'm forgetting. They're allowed to preempt your parking 5 nights a year, where if they have a big event at the Lights, big concert, somebody's coming to town, they could come in and say, this for tonight, your tenants are out. This is our, people, it's event parking for the night. They could do that 5 nights. You told me that's happened 30 times this year, and they planned for it. Like, they gave you a schedule for 34. They've done it already 30 times this year, and they just said, we're just going to do this. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'm just going to back up a little bit.
Sure.
And tell you, so Todd had this vision for the Lights, and I think he did a great job. It's a wonderful facility.
Oh yeah, I want to stipulate to that right now. It's clearly popular. They've clearly done something right. A lot of people enjoy it. That's not the issue. Is that it's some stupid thing? It's clearly a very good. I mean, they hit the ball out of the park. They did a great job.
Yeah, he absolutely did, and Todd deserves most of the credit for that. And in the paper today, you had a picture of the Justin Moore concert in 2022. I was at that concert. It's a wonderful event. And Todd deserves most of the credit for driving this. But frankly, he's probably too good of a salesman, because when he went to the city with his last couple of buildings, he didn't have any parking on the surface around him. And the city, we knew when we first were designing this project, my engineer pointed out to the city that, hey, you don't have enough parking here. You're going to have a deficit. And their answer was to stop inviting him to the planning meetings, because they didn't like what he was telling them. And the city eventually got a parking study that showed that they were short. And they, even with that in hand, the last couple Epic buildings, they permitted him knowing there was a huge parking deficit. So when we look at this, I'm going, hey, and now of course they're taking my parking. They're just ignoring the contract. We agreed to 5 nights a year because we want to, hey, there's going to be people that come to town where they're great events, big events. And we want that. We said, we can live with that. We'll work around it. Give us some lead time. We'll make it work. But instead, they've just decided that Epic or West Fargo Events, whatever, someone needs more parking and they're just going to take mine. And this is a situation where this isn't theoretical. This is an objective fact. You can't get around this.
Jim, let me drill down with the city a little bit. You said that they stopped inviting him to the planning and zoning meetings, but of course those are public meetings. Anyone can show up to those and interject public comments. Certainly developers who are looking for a permit. How was it the city was able to not invite him back or discourage him from being involved in the conversations with parking there?
These weren't planning and zoning meetings. These were just separate ad hoc planning meetings for the lights with the city and with Epic and with West Fargo Events.
And they weren't public meetings. They weren't open to the public, even though they were city planners and city staff.
I guess I don't know the answer to that, but they were no longer sending him the meeting invites and made it clear that they didn't want to hear any more about it.
Let's drill down to kind of the meat of it though, because as Rob said, there's a pretty large buildup in explaining all the background to this. But the reason, Jim, I had mentioned the TIF credits, and for those who aren't in the development game, those are taxes being deferred with the idea that you are using it towards economic growth. Now in the Fargo-Moorhead area, we've seen that used from things all the way from student housing to, there were a few instances in Moorhead where they were applying them to like fast food restaurants, so like Taco Bell's and Jimmy John's, and claiming that was, and I'm showing my bias, obviously, that was economic development. There were those who would push back and say, those probably could and should exist profitably on their own. And if they can't, we don't really understand why they're getting a tax deferment whilst others among us are getting their property taxes, the same, if not increasing every year. You wrote a pretty spicy op-ed here talking about other developers' relationships with the city of West Fargo. And the reason I brought up my comment about the TIF being the maximum 20 years is I don't know of a lot of commercial properties around Fargo-Moorhead that have gotten that full 20 years. It's typically 5. Do you think this relationship to Rob's point, good Lord, to Rob's point, is inappropriate with the city, that there's some kind of way that they're getting these exclusive rights or maximum benefits to the point where other developers aren't speaking to the city? Because at the very least, that is now the question on people's minds. So especially given the editorial you wrote, can you speak to that, Jim, what your thoughts are?
Sure. I don't know that that there was anything untoward about the TIF process here. They use the maximum 20 years because this lights and the ramp are a big project. So I think that was more a function of looking at how much tax base they had to generate in order to get the dollars, and that's why they had to get us looped in to build more. So I don't know that there was anything wrong about that, and I'm unaware of anything wrong with that process with regard to the lights.
And really, I want to focus on the city government's part of this, because we can talk about, and I don't want to describe the way this stuff works is that the private sector should just be out to get whatever the government can give them indiscriminately. But at the end of the day, the government's the government. They're the ones who set the rules, right? And we have the legislature, and we have city commissions and county commissions and planning boards and all this stuff, but they make the rules. And when the private sector brings proposals for something like a TIF district or just to develop, they're the ones who say yay or nay. So, at the end of the day, while Epic, is kind of the one that is seemingly the beneficiary of a lot of this bias, it's the city government that I think that we really got to look at. They're the ones who are not ensuring that there's enough parking around these developments. They're the ones who are using their power kind of at the behest of Epic in certain ways that seem one-sided. I really think that's the focus we need to keep here, is that I think the folks in the city of Fargo owe some explanations. What is going on here?
Yeah, Rob, I completely agree. This was a situation where this isn't Epic's problem. Epic submitted a plan to the city. The city's there to safeguard the taxpayer and the community. And it's the city commission that didn't do their job. But they have 2 commissioners that are on the West Fargo Events board.
Commissioners.
Yeah, 2 city commissioners that sit on the West Fargo Events.
Well, the mayor and a city commissioner, I believe. And there's representatives from the school board and representatives from the park district.
Right. But when a developer, when the Epic or the Lights or whoever go to the city and say, we want to build a building and there's not enough parking, and the city has in front of them a study that says you're 800 parking spots short, and they want to build another building with no surface parking, where are the city commissioners in this? Where's their loyalty? Is it to the city and the taxpayers, or is it to Epic and the Lights? And that's the part that is difficult here, and it's difficult for me to watch, because as I've been involved in this for 3 years of having the city just flat out ignore this contract, it certainly appears that they're looking out for Epic and looking out for the Lights, at least to my detriment. And this is a big undertaking. When we built this building, this was the most expensive residential building built in West Fargo ever. I have investors in this thing from Jackson Hole to New York City, and they're relying on me to make sure that their money is invested properly, and I relied on the city and their representations.
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we're talking about there's a long-term view here as well. I mean, I'm a lowly newspaper columnist and not a developer, and so all I can do is observe. But it seems to me, as popular in the Lights and all those developments down there are, if the parking situation continues to be a chronic problem, where people who are wanting to go to the businesses there, or think about having living there, or think about attending events there, if they get used to the idea that parking is a nightmare, and every time there's a big event, there's nowhere to park, there's nowhere to go, people are going to stop going, and they're going to start making the choice to do business there. So in the short term, yes, this is very popular. In the long term, I'm worried if you don't develop it properly, that in the long run, it's going to fail, or maybe just not succeed as well as it could.
Well, and what we're looking at, as a developer, I did in my editorial, I did point out to the city that, they want to do a phase 2 to the Lights, around the park, the hockey arena, and in the parking lot. Epic has proposed to build more buildings on this school district and city-owned property. This is only going to make the parking worse. They're going to take up what little parking there is, and they have 1,000 parking spot deficit already. If they go build more buildings here, this is only going to make it more attractive for them to try and take away the parking they've already sold to me. And that's, we look at this, we certainly weren't going to give the city a proposal based on how we've been treated. And West Fargo is a small community. The developers who are working in this part of the community are all friends of mine. We all get along, but no one, at least at this particular time, how could you trust West Fargo when they're playing favorites with developers?
And so that was kind of the point of your op-ed, correct? That you're seeing other developers, like you said, it's a tight-knit community, and very frankly, the dollars it takes to start large commercial projects like this exists in fairly rarefied environments. Not just someone's not going to come around as a hobbyist and just build a 42-unit apartment building. Point being, it takes 7-8 digit investment dollars, know-how, expertise, and a workforce to do it, let alone permitting and, of course, demand from the customers. But you were saying in your op-ed that you're hearing now that other developers are not approaching the city of West Fargo, and that for the local economy is a very big deal, because I think if West Fargo isn't the fastest growing city in North Dakota, it's number 2 or 3. Say it's been on the grow, and that's their slogan. Are those developers scared to approach the city because of what the city has done specific to the Lights? What is it that's making them kind of skittish?
So, and Ben, I've been developing in West Fargo for 30 years.
Yeah.
The large portions of the city south of the interstate. I've owned all of this property that the Lights is on at one time or another. Mm-hmm. We sold it to the school district. So I'm familiar with it.
Like you said, it's a small community. I was absolutely flabbergasted when I read your editorial. I was like, wow, somebody really.
So, I mean, I'm familiar with the development game, especially as it relates to West Fargo. And when other developers they're completely aware of the parking issue. This is not a secret in the development industry. I talk to these people. Many of them are my clients. And when the city, takes and instead of defending my rights as they're required to under this contract, they're the ones taking it away for the benefit of Epic. if you're a different developer, why would you ever bother submitting a proposal for a development when the city clearly plays favorites here? And this is why they only got one request, or one answer to their request for proposal. It was just Epic. Who else would waste their time?
And that's because they know that Epic is being favored by the city right now.
I think that is a belief anyway from the people I've talked to, and I don't think it's a secret who I'm talking about, but I don't really want to bring them into the conversation. But yeah, right. But
if they want to call me, I would be happy to interview them on the record if they want to tell their stories.
They've all expressed their displeasure to the city of Fargo on a different project.
Okay, but
this is a situation where the taxpayer the taxpayer's not getting represented here. If the perception is that Epic's the only game in town, no one else is going to give them ideas. And hey, don't get me wrong, Epic's got great ideas. That's not my point. But you're only getting one player here. The city's not getting their best bang for the buck if they've chased everybody else away.
Well, that I think gets into the philosophical argument. The government belongs to all of us. They shouldn't be playing favorites. They're the referees. And to a degree, I mean, they have a role in maybe trying to be innovative and getting, but part of that is bring lots of ideas to the table from diverse sources. So have you noticed, I mean, obviously this has been in the headlines for a bit. You have a long-standing sort of dispute with West Fargo Events over the parking thing. As this has gotten some attention, have you noticed a change at all in recent days?
For the first time in 3 years, West Fargo wants to talk about parking. So yeah, I thank you for that. Had the forum not carried my letter, I mean, we've been roundly ignored by the city for 3 years on this issue, and they just don't take it seriously. So I'm happy to hear that they want to talk. It's finally, frankly, it's about time. It's just 3 seasons we put up with this. It always seems like they want to talk at the end of the fall, though, after they've had their events. Then it seems to get better when it's wintertime and they don't need the parking.
And how long? I mean, your parking agreement, I mean, that's a 30-year agreement. Am I right?
Yeah, it's 30 or 35, Rob. I can't remember.
Yeah. And by the way, anybody who wants to read the full contract, it's in my column today. I embedded it, so you can go take a look at it for yourselves. I mean, Jim, what are your next steps? I mean, if it gets to a point where they're just going to keep preempting your parking 30, 35 times, maybe more a year, like you said, this has been going on for 3 years already. The deal was executed. I think it was signed January 2020. So I mean, it's basically since the beginning of the deal, I'm assuming. What do you do next if it continues?
Well, I mean, the city's not leaving us a lot of solutions. We demanded that they fire West Fargo Events because we have that right under the contract.
And I'm sorry, Jim, can we specify for listeners, when you say we, who exactly is we in that sense?
Well, me. I guess
you. Okay.
I would be the proverbial we, but it's Northern Lights. It's me and my partners. Okay. We sent our protest letter to the city on Monday. I let them know on Sunday and just said, I'm through with this. Don't want them fired. And you got to find someone else to do this because they obviously are having a hard time counting to 5. And
now, to be a little fair to them, it was on Monday, but have you received a response?
No, I did. The West Fargo city attorney did reach out to me yesterday, and we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Okay. So we did it after my letter to the editor. Yeah, we did get a response. I had actually emailed them early last week and didn't get a reply until the forum ran the letter.
What happens? I mean, if West Fargo Events was obviously created to manage the parking garage and manage it. And part of it, I wondered, again, getting back to how intertwined West Fargo Events is with Epic, and I think that is really problematic. What would happen? And this is not me saying, I mean, by all accounts, Epic's a very successful company. Things are going fine. I don't know otherwise. But what would happen, given how intertwined everything is? What would happen if Epic went belly up and all of a sudden the lights wasn't a thing anymore?
Yeah, Rob, I really don't know. I mean, like you, we've had a difficult time kind of telling where West Fargo Events ends and Epic starts. And I just as it relates to the lights, at least, it's difficult to tell when they have a concert. Is this an Epic event? Is this a West Fargo event? And the names are similar. what they do is very similar, and it doesn't really matter to me as long as they stay away from my parking. But if the city's putting this is not a city department. This is a separate entity, West Fargo Events, and the taxpayer doesn't get to see how the money gets spent like they would if this was a city department. They don't get to see if it's making money or losing money. And you raised a good point. If West Fargo Events is losing money or were to go belly up, I don't know what would happen.
That's what I'm worried about. And I always get a little skeptical when we start seeing, like the school district, for instance. They own land in this. They're on the West Fargo Events board. What's their exposure? I mean, do we want our school districts to be partners in an entertainment venue? I mean, entertainment venues are great, but they can be risky. And the school district's job is not entertainment venues. So I think that's really weird. And I'm wondering what the exposure is. I think the taxpayers are owed that.
No, Rob, I agree. The taxpayers certainly need to be their interests need to be first and foremost here. And I don't actually understand what the relationship is with these entities and Epic. What I do know is that it's very difficult to understand how, at least with the city commissioners, how they can represent the taxpayers while at the same time represent West Fargo Events or Epic or whoever interest they're watching out for. It seems to be a conflict that they just do not have a way to get around.
Can I wanted to ask you a broader question, Jim, about the solution for this. Before I do that, I want to play just a little bit of devil's advocate and say, I could see and I haven't had these conversations, but I could see if I were on that board and it was expressed to me both by the city and by investors, hey, we want representation from the park board, school board, city commission, and they ask people to come on, they volunteer their time to come on, and honestly, volunteer boardship, it's probably a once a month at this point Zoom call, right? These are all guesses, but I could see them coming back and saying, hey, we were asked to have representation on it, so then we did that. Now you're complaining about that. So what do you want? What would you say to that end of the argument?
Well, and Ben, that's, whenever these type of, quasi-governmental entities are set up, that this becomes a difficult area and difficult waters to navigate here. But, what I can say is, perhaps that representation needs to be a staff person and not a commissioner. Someone who can report to the commission and give them some advice.
That makes sense to me, or a city manager.
Yeah. But, what I can tell you is I have had, and I'll spare Commissioner Simmons the public airing of the details, but I've had wholly inappropriate conversations with Commissioner Simmons where he's advocating for West Fargo Events as opposed to the taxpayer, and it left me very uncomfortable with the conversation. And frankly, I don't think that you can execute that role as a city commissioner and represent the interest of the lights when you know that as a city commission you've created a huge parking deficit. They have a problem here.
Well, okay, so then to the broader point, Jim, you've been speaking to this discomfort that you feel the city's created then with as you said, small development community in the Fargo-Moorhead, kind of North Dakota area. They all know each other. What do you think would be the solution, the full solution? If you were either Mayor or Commissioner Bullis for a week or King for the day, what could the city do to fully repair the reputational damage that you and others in the development community have felt? What would make you trust them? Because they could say something, but just saying something once probably isn't going to change it. What could they do in the next 2 or 3 months to make it to make it whole?
Yeah, that's a good question. Commissioner Bullis is kind of a scary thing. I don't want to hear that for a while.
We'll just get you a Burger King hat.
All right, even better. There you go. If I was Burger King for a day, it's difficult, Ben, to say, because as you pointed out, I've been hearing a lot of promises for 3 years, none of which have come true. But they have created a 1,000-car parking deficit for this facility. And to fix this is going to cost $30-40 million to fix. And unfortunately, it's going to be to fix it, the taxpayer is going to have to step up. And this is the problem the commission has created when they have permitted all these buildings with no parking. And West Fargo Events isn't going to bear the brunt of this. It's going to be the taxpayer.
Yeah. Well, and there's where I would come in. We just had elections in June. Now, in West Fargo, it happened that all incumbents ran again and were elected again. But say a new commissioner was there, one of 5 that just got elected in June, and all of a sudden this is falling on your lap 2 months. Sorry, we're in an odd year. Excuse me, that was last year. But even then, last year, 1 year ago, you get elected, and then all this stuff with the lights is already happening. And then you have someone like you coming up and saying, hey, what's going on? What can they do to turn it around? Is the ship too big to turn on too quickly? Because there should be a solution. In addition, we're talking about the problem, but I want to see what would make this better for everybody.
First, there's no good solutions to this problem that the city commission has created. I mean, in the short term, maybe they have to stop having big name concerts at the lights that are going to draw 5,000 people. Maybe they have to, for a couple of years until they get some parking built, maybe they have to limit these to smaller venue or smaller events. Maybe they've got to shuttle some people from someplace else. I don't know, but the answer can't be that we're going to continue to breach our contract with the Northern Lights. And that's the route they've chosen, because I think it's the path of least resistance, but it doesn't make it right.
Jim, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Well, we just finished up our interview with Jim Bullis, and I want to put right here immediately what I did when we broke for a moment there and said goodbye to Jim. He name-checked a West Fargo city commissioner named Mark Simmons, saying that they had an inappropriate conversation. First time I'd heard about that, I immediately sent an email to Mr. Simmons inviting him to come on the show as well and respond to that, because certainly we're interested in both sides of this story. And also, I mean, we need to hear from West Fargo now. We need to hear from the city. Why is this stuff going on? Explain this to us. Is there a case to be made for it? So we'll certainly see how that develops. I hope he comes on, because I would enjoy having that conversation with him. And
I'll jump in and say, if everyone really wants to get into this, especially if you're not from West Fargo, it's kind of now it's a 3-column story in the form, because it was your initial column. Then Jim Bullis has an opinion, a letter to the editor. Correct? That's the right term.
Yep.
I want to make sure I'm getting my newspaper term. And then you have a third one out today about the parking situation. This is actually like quite a bit of in-depth reporting on the local development situation that, very frankly, a lot of times in Fargo-Moorhead, we don't hear about until well after the fact, or like Jim was referring to, it's among the developer community, but others might not know.
Well, I mean, and this is after the fact. I mean, the parking study he was alluding to is from 2021. I mean, the lights is built. It's not going anywhere. It's there, and there's an existing problem there, and the city of West Fargo. And the reason why, normally I don't drill this far down into like local politics like this, but in a lot of ways, this is the story, and this is kind of the segue into what we're going to talk about next, is there's big developments happening all over the state. And there's a lot of I think you could describe it in some ways as innovative, where they're trying, like having a nonprofit and then doing, using that. People are trying a lot of things, and there's a lot of developers that are trying a lot of things. And Epic, by the way, has a statewide footprint. And this stuff's just because this is happening in West Fargo, and maybe you don't live in West Fargo. Heck, I don't live in West Fargo. It's still interesting because something similar could be happening in your backyard. And as a citizen, you should be informed about this stuff and understand what's going on. And also, looming in the background of all of this is the property tax issue, which is an bottomless well of dissatisfaction among North Dakotans, where every election cycle, every legislative session, we hear people are upset about their property taxes. It never changes. Nothing the legislature's done has made much of a difference. And I would argue part of that is not even so much incompetence or just bad policy, although there's been some of that. It's more the legislature doesn't levy the property tax. This is a local issue that needs to be solved at the local level. And at some point, it may not even need, maybe it's, depending on your perspective, maybe it's not even a problem, but like we've got to get back to where voters have a conversation with their park district, with their city council, with their county commission. If your property taxes are too high, then there's going to have to be some trade-offs. You're going to have to.
Property taxes in the state of North Dakota are an absolutely bizarre political and election issue. If you brought in a competent political or campaign consultant from another state and gave them North Dakota, and I mean, at this point, they'd probably be a Republican consultant, and said, this has been an everlasting issue. It's been on the books for 2 decades. They would probably say, well, okay, so who hasn't dealt with it? Who hasn't done it? Who, is the opposition party to blame? Is it, oh no, it's kind of, there's the Republicans run everything by 90% of the Republicans agree it's a problem. Yeah, a vast majority of them talk about it and do. Okay, so why haven't we done anything? I mean, it sounds absurd on the face of it. And I think for voters who don't live and breathe this stuff, it seems it feeds itself well into the cynical narrative that all politicians are bad, all government is corrupt, and therefore we should throw out the baby with the bathwater, which is, I think, where you're leading up towards, which is what we're going to have with a ballot initiative probably next year, at least in
I think
my
it's going to
opinion.
it's going to make the ballot. I mean, North Dakota's, and this is a topic for a whole other show, but North Dakota's, and I've talked about it at length. Maybe nobody cares, but North Dakota's initiated measure process is a joke. There's little accountability. There's little scrutiny. Basically, anybody who's got enough money can buy their issue onto the ballot. I mean, it's basically the collecting signatures things is a formality. And by the way, what happened last year with the term limits ballot measure, where the Supreme Court just punted on the Secretary of State's ability to look at this stuff. Now, the legislature's made some changes to the law. I guess we'll see, giving the Secretary of State more authority to.
Point being, there was found fraud, and it was still allowed to be on the ballot,
Right.
and then was voted in, is now the law that we abide by, even though there was fraud in the ballot collecting process,
Right.
which seems a little bit flawed.
The Attorney General said there was fraud. The Secretary of State at the time, Al Jagger, said there was fraud. A district court judge who did a preliminary hearing for the Supreme Court, he found fraud. So, I mean, but it ended up on the ballot anyway.
Can be pretty bipartisan too, because when you have enough money to put kind of anything on the ballot, you could put some pretty egregious stuff, left, right, and otherwise, on the ballot, or personal hobby horses.
We have a legacy fund. We have billions of dollars just sitting in a pot in Bismarck with no defined purpose. You think somebody with a hobby horse isn't going to come along and say, let's put some really stupid idea on the ballot? And everyone's like, oh yeah, well, the voters vote for it. Well, maybe the voters shouldn't be making complicated policy decisions at the ballot box. Anyway, I go off on my anti-populist rant there for a minute.
Well, but next year, one of the things that issues like the one that Bullis is bringing up with the conflation of a company that is, by all public perception, seems to be way too cozy with the city government, is going to lead to a certain political stripe that I would call reactionary. And in the long run, an overall net negative, because the things that they are advocating for, and this is the Bastiat Caucus, the Rick Beckers of the world, the Tony Garricks of the world, and Tony Garrick's very localized to Fargo, but this political stripe is represented all over the state, is they're simply against things, and they want to make sure that we're not doing those anymore. So if they're up to them, we wouldn't have a Renaissance zone. If you're up to them, I'm sure the Main Street Initiative is considered a waste of taxpayer dollars. And the problem is, when larger developers, and larger developers are people of means, get nice tax breaks from city, local, state governments, and every citizen, Joe, Jane, Q citizen, sees their property tax rising every year consistently, they get annoyed. Yeah. And it's hard not to say that's justifiable. And so a very simplistic solution is going to be offered to them next year in a ballot measure.
There are reasons for people to be upset about this stuff. Because listen, if you think your property taxes are too high, and then the city's handing out property tax breaks, that, I mean, let's be honest, as a practical matter, the impact of something like a TIF district is it narrows the property tax base. It narrows it granted for a limited amount of time, and the idea is it encourages development that in the long run expands the property tax base. But if you're constantly doing these things, you're narrowing the property, you're putting upward pressure on property taxes for people in the moment when they're already upset about their property taxes. And then some of these deals start looking a little too cozy and everything. And you've got on your hands the recipe for a reactionary revolt that pushes people like former state representative Rick Becker, who's pushing a ballot measure to abolish property taxes in North Dakota again. And if I'm looking across, this was my recent column about this, I'm looking across the state, at all these districts that are raised, Grand Forks County, Ward County, here in Minot, you have Bismarck, Fargo. They're all raising their budgets, and they're all raising property taxes. And maybe it's justified in some of these instances, right? I mean, every community's budget situation is different, but maybe it's
Reaction
justified.
To inflation, COLA, on and so forth.
Sure, but part of the problem is this has been such a long-standing issue. It's hard to use the excuses of the moment to justify what's been a long-standing problem that nobody's done anything about, and now the voters may do something stupid about it. We may take a sledgehammer, to the situation. I mean, the ballot measure that Rick Becker's pushing, let's stipulate to this. It eliminates property taxes starting in January of 2025. We would vote on it depending on when they get their signatures in either June or November. I'm guessing they're probably aiming for the November ballot. But we're going to vote on it in 2024. If it passes months later in January, just as the new legislature that was just elected is coming into session, property taxes are gone. So that legislature has to figure out how to replace billions of dollars in local revenues with state funding. Where's that money going to come from? People say, well, the legacy fund. Well, I'm here to tell you, the legacy fund's revenues, and I may have gotten the math a little bit wrong, and actually in the wrong, it may look even worse than what I described in my column. I think I mixed up.
We could invite some folks on to actually deep dive into that, what truly tapping into the legacy fund would be like. I think that'd be a good.
Well, the math, but I don't think.
Show.
Well, sure, that's a great idea. You don't have to be an expert to do the math, though. Because the math is, it produces about on an annual basis, it produces about the legacy fund's earnings produce about 1/6 of what we would need to replace local revenues. So unless you want to start spending down the principle of the legacy fund's no bailout for this. So,
I wish the Rick Beckers of the world would get a little bit more prescriptive. If they were making good faith arguments, which I don't feel that they probably are, and I'm guessing you agree with me, Rob. If they're being more prescriptive, could we take a look at something like eliminating property taxes on a primary residential home? And then what does it look like to keep them where they're at on agriculture, commercial, and secondary properties? And the pushback could be, maybe that's not fair to those others, but the crux of the problem with property taxes has been, you save up, you pay off your home, you're fiscally responsible. Now you're retired. Frankly, you're older, you're less capable of working, and the government's coming in and giving you a North Dakota mortgage, taxing you out of your house. And nobody on, left, right, center likes that. And if they would come up with something that wasn't just, we're going to get rid of the entirety of property taxes and make someone else come up with it, we could maybe talk that. But they don't. They're not willing to make it nuanced, and that to me is the real problem.
Yeah, but the thing is that the voters may not care, because listen, there's a similar proposal to eliminate the property tax failed spectacularly in 20. I think 76% of people, more than 76% of people, voted against it in 2012. Here's the thing: it's not 2012 anymore.
I don't.
We're in a very different political environment. And also, there's a lot of North Dakotans who are going to remember that in 2012, they heard a lot of lawmakers and a lot of local officials and school officials and all the people, that big coalition that came out against abolishing the property taxes. They promised solutions. And it's more than a decade later, and I don't know that there's a lot of North Dakotans out there who feel like the property tax situation's been resolved to anybody's satisfaction.
Then we have a good chunk of new voters in this state, which is a positive because we've been attracting people to this state. But we've got a good chunk of people who weren't here. It used to be in North Dakota for a long while, and I'd use the Heitkamp versus Berg Senate race as an example. Heidi Heitkamp hadn't held office for 12 years, but she didn't really need to introduce herself because everyone kind of knew who she was, whether you liked her or not, because the voting population, very frankly, just hadn't changed that much. And that's not negative, positive, whatever. It's just, it was the voting population was pretty stagnant.
Yeah, North Dakota's been one of the fastest growing states in the union over the last decade. We've also become one of the youngest states in the union. And so
more young people are staying here who weren't voting in 2012.
More young people have come here to fill jobs. The oil boom brought a bunch of young people. There's been a lot of factors. But, you want to talk about, we talk about this while somebody on a fixed income who, is trying to hold on to their house and trying to pay their property tax. What about a young person who's just trying to buy their first house or buy some property?
And in Fargo, we've had a major flip. We are majority renter here. It's not overall good for the economy. Not because we need to force everybody into home ownership, and that's not what anybody's saying. But we are, compared to similar sized cities, Omaha, Nebraska, Lawrence, Kansas, Sioux City, Iowa, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We are 20% less homeowners than renters, and it just makes for a more transient population, for people to be less civically involved, and it doesn't allow them to build wealth as much, because when you own your own home, you're building that wealth into that home for the long term. So it's overall a negative trend here.
I just don't know. I don't know what the problem is, because I'm looking, and again, these local governments could say, oh, we have inflation, we have all these other things going on. It doesn't really excuse what you've been doing for the last decade, which is almost nothing to hold property taxes in check. I mean, depending on which jurisdiction we're talking about. But I don't know that the voters are going to care about nuanced arguments about inflation and stuff. Because the thing is voters are dealing with inflation too. They're going to the grocery store. Their bills there are higher. Their utilities bills are going up, and their property taxes are going up. They're not going to have a lot of patience for that argument.
They won't, and justifiably so. I asked Jim, and it's not on Jim necessarily, but he is bringing this up. What would it take for the West Fargo City Council and this commission, in this situation to make things better, make things whole? And very frankly, I don't think he had a direct answer for me. And again, he's not in the public sector, so I understand that. But there's also a little part of me, we've talked, Rob, back and forth about how there is less interest in running for public office now, because there's a lot of gotcha games going on. There's a lot of anger boiling over at even city commission meetings, or what should be fairly, common local government. If you're just elected to the city of West Fargo, you come in, you think a 20-year TIF for a project as big as the lights is ridiculous. There's nothing you can do. You're stuck with that for the next better part of 2 decades. Say you come in and you think this parking situation is really bad and they've underdeveloped it. Well, it's already been built. It's already been paved. And people are already coming to the event center. What are you going to do? Stand there and stop the people from coming to events? There is part of me that does think, what is the solution for the local government person? They can say the right things, but to your point, for the voter that's feeling inflation, feeling some populist anger towards this, and is just looking at the next election, what is it they can do? And I don't know.
Yeah, well, a part of the problem, and again, we all have to live in the moment, but this has been boiling for more than a decade. And longer,
2 decades for property taxes.
Longer even, right? I'm talking about decades since the last time this was on the ballot.
Sure.
And I think part of the problem is that, the locals, the political strategy through the North Dakota Association of Counties and the League of Cities, I see them show up. I see what they do. They blamed the legislature for this. And then the legislature tried to solve the problem by buying down property, because we had all these state level surpluses thanks to the oil boom. We basically hid the problem in state revenues. And I mean, that's a twofold problem. One, it doesn't address what's driving the problem at the local level, which is a local problem where you have to, if you don't like how much your property tax is, you may have to accept that you're going to have fewer parks. And you may have to accept that there's going to be more school fees or something, because property, I don't know, you're going to have to accept some trade-offs if you want lower taxes. I mean, that's the reality. Or maybe, I'm not necessarily ruling out the idea that there's waste too. I mean, there could be, depending on where you live. I don't know what your situation is, but they blame the legislature, and the legislature hid the problem in state surpluses, but that's not going to work anymore, because hiding the problem in state surplus, that's what Rick Becker wants to do. They want the state to just take over all of it. So if we by doing that, we kind of did what they wanted to do anyway, right? Every solution to the legislature is kind of the legislature buying off chunks of the property tax. And now Becker's saying, well, if we're doing that, let's just go the whole hog. Let's just do it all. And I think that would be a mistake, but this is where we're at.
I think there's going to be plenty of voters that think that's very popular. And I'll really be wondering where moneyed interests like the state chamber of commerce is going to come down buying TV ads and online ads. I wonder because Becker hasn't shown the kind of discipline it takes with his Senate campaign or other causes he's gotten behind to really run a complete media narrative,
Right.
I'd be very frightened of how effective it would be if he would stick to it.
Becker is very good at picking the right issues that people are mad about. He's good at it. Becker is probably going to be more of a drag on this issue. Now, I'm not saying it's going to fail because of him. I think he's probably going to do more harm than help because he's not as popular a figure with the general electorate. And I don't know what kind of money is going to be behind him. I mean, even gathering signatures, running a strictly volunteer effort, which is what he says he's going to do. But he didn't necessarily rule out paying to collect signatures, but he's saying it's going to be a volunteer effort. That's tough. That's tough if you don't start writing some big checks to get it done. And then beyond that, then you're going to have to run an marketing campaign to do it. Now, it may not matter because people are just so ticked off about their property taxes. Maybe he doesn't have to. I don't know. I don't know how to handicap that. But what I'm saying is local governments have to be in front of the property tax problem. They've been hiding for too long. They either need to explain what they're doing and communicate with their voters that this is what we're doing, or they need to accept that they need to cut property taxes. And again, it's so hard because even within a community, I mean, the property tax thing is so weird. Your property tax bill is a lot of different governing boards that don't really have all that. I mean, the park district is a completely separate elected board from your city commission, from your county commission, right?
From the school board.
From the school board. So, I mean, it's so fractured, it becomes very, very difficult to, I guess, hold people accountable in the way that you normally would. I don't know.
And you have to have such messaging discipline for someone who in theory, we're talking about a city commissioner here, they're elected part-time to do this job, and they almost certainly have another full-time job, and God forbid a family at home. They're also trying to interact with it. They're not really able to run a multi-million dollars worth of messaging campaign here. But we probably talked that one to death here, and I wanted to make sure you got time to talk about. I haven't been able to really deep dive into this Mercer County story you ran here today.
Yeah, well, okay, so that may be a side effect of what we're talking about. The Mercer County story is, if you go, I have the YouTube video of the public meeting, and it was sent to me by a reader from Mercer County who said, you got to check out this August 9th meeting. And I'm watching it, and like the first 5 or 6 minutes begins like just about every county commission meeting you've ever seen, right? They do a roll call, they approve the previous meeting's minutes, and then they ask the county auditor, to introduce the preliminary budget that they want to start working on, right? They put together like a draft budget, basically, that's all the department head recommendations. And so the commissioners wanted that introduced to them so they could start playing with it, right? That's their job is,
Sure.
What if we did this? What if we did that? What does that do to mills? That's the budgeting process. Well, the auditor starts reading the budget, and she just goes off on him. I mean, just completely like, like the first 5-6 minutes, she's just kind of droning on about it. And then she gets going. And then she, at one point she said that she felt that the pay the commissioners received for serving on the commission was a misappropriation of county dollars. She starts saying, I am the chief financial officer of I'm quoting her now. I am the chief financial officer of Mercer County. Not 1 cent is spent without my authority. This is our preliminary budget, and I want to explain things before I hand them out to you. She goes, and then she continues, as your auditor, this is a balanced budget, and you do what you need to do. The only thing you can do with this budget right now is cut it, and you go ahead and cut it. Then what I'm doing is I'm taking that total you want to cut, and all those cuts are coming out of every one of your budgets for 2024 and the state's attorneys, because you're all on this together. You don't want to work with me. That's okay. I am giving the commission and state's attorney until the end of the year to learn what a good commission and state's attorney does and acts accordingly. Otherwise, as of January 1, 2024, all elected commission total budgets and the elected state's attorney salary and benefits will be totally unfunded. Yeah, she just went off. And now that's her saying, you're not going to make any cuts to this budget or I'm going to go nuclear on you. And by the way, I don't think she has the authority to do any of that. And
I was going to say, that sounds like a very specific individual.
And in fact, when I spoke to her, she acknowledged that she doesn't have the authority to do any of that. She just said she justified it by just saying, I needed them to pay attention because I'm so angry. And listen, Mercer County's coal country and central North Dakota. So they've been dealing with some special challenges as the tonnage of coal is going down. They're losing some of the revenues, that they get from that.
I'm guessing no county commissioner there wanted that to happen, nor did any county commissioner there cause that to happen.
All they wanted, all the commission, and listen, I'm not up to speed on Mercer County politics. It may surprise you.
Shame on you.
But I got to think that they just wanted to start marking up the budget. And ultimately, they're the elected officials. It's up to them, and they've got to make some tough choices. But it just, I guess what it illustrates for this discussion is how fraught the property tax situation is from.
Yeah.
Because that's what it all leads up to is.
Yeah, and this goes back to your point about, you've been talking about Bastiat Caucus members taking over district elections and not necessarily representing the majority of Republican voter thoughts.
Or even the majority of voters, frankly.
Or the majority, certainly not the majority of voters. And then we're talking about people running for local office. All these kind of tense situations in very frankly lower elected official roles. This is a county commissioner, and Mercer County is, I'm going to go ahead and estimate 50,000 people tops.
No. I'm going to look it up, but that's not even close. And by the way, this is a county auditor. It's 2021 population 8,323.
8,000. I'm not calling any of the people, the Mercer County commissioners, podunks, or I'm not dismissing them. But when they're looking at the small population county, looking to serve on this board, this is why there are places where they have to appoint people to the county commissions. They have to appoint people there because they don't run. They're just open seats. Because why would they want to run and deal with this? Why would they want to?
Well, they're not even getting it from the public. They're getting it from the county auditor, who herself was elected. And it was a contested election. She won with, I think it was like 56% of the vote, something like that.
And we'd be remiss not to talk about, just touch on briefly, in the city of Horace, we had a recall election for somebody because she took a vote, which I think is utterly ridiculous. She got rid of a property tax abatement. Now, you could not like that, and that's fine, but that's what she's elected to vote on. They recalled her. They had a special election, and she got reelected.
Yeah. A special election, which, by the way, undoubtedly, a special election that undoubtedly costs thousands and thousands of dollars, because that's just what it costs. But yeah, and again, by the way, recall, if you're out there and you're angry, recall elections are not for elected officials who make a decision you don't like. Well, like I think we should raise property taxes, or I think we should cut funding for this thing. That's not what they're for. Recall elections are like if somebody's corrupt. Like if somebody's taking bribes. Granted, that's not what the law says, and you can use a recall for whatever you want. But to me, philosophically, that's kind of how I viewed it. Like if somebody I elected is making the wrong decisions, then I'm just going to vote against them at the next election. I'm not going to recall them because they're just not governing the way that I wanted them to govern.
Yeah, I completely agree. We have a looser set of recall rules. We have a very populist-based government system set up in the state. It involves a lot of elected officials, an ability to recall, an ability to do a statewide ballot measure. But what we're kind of getting at is what's kind of allowed for now is for tempers to run hot, and for folks to make maybe, I don't know, more. More decisions based around emotions than what might be better long term.
That process works when you can trust, because we spend so much time talking about politicians and they're not listening to us, et cetera, et cetera. I think we got to stop letting voters off the hook, because we have like two groups. It's either the people who just aren't showing up and don't care and aren't informing themselves about the decisions, and then you have the people who are super, super active, who have become reactionary and are making at times bad decisions. And so that's kind of the scary thing is the whole system of democracy, these populist institutions, whether you want to talk about recall elections or ballot measures or just the elections themselves, electing representatives to these various government entities, it's all based on the idea that the public generally is going to make wise decisions. But yet I look at the Republican primary right now, and a man who is under felony indictment in 4 different districts is the prohibitive frontrunner. I don't know what to do if you get to a point where just the voters themselves are reactionary and making bad decisions. I mean, we spend so much time saying problem is political leadership, and a lot of times it is. Don't get me wrong, but we got to stop letting ourselves off the hook. We're the ones who are electing.
A few dozen felonies or indictments between friends. That's all. It's just fine.
That's all.
We'd be remiss if we didn't mention you had gotten to interview our governor, Governor Burgum, during his time in the Iowa State Fair, and that was the last podcast for this. There was a new Emerson College poll in New Hampshire where Governor Burgum is now tied with Nikki Haley. He's beating Vivek Ramaswamy. He's beating Mike Pence. And he's only 2 points or a rounding error under
within the polls margin of error.
He's within Ron DeSantis. He's also got 1/10 of Donald Trump's support. So
I mean, that's kind of the thing is you could say, oh look, he's pulling up or above all these or near all these recognizable names, but he's also eating Donald Trump's dust along with everybody else. And that, by the way, that New Hampshire poll, he's actually down a little bit. His previous polling, I think he was at here. I can actually pull it up. I have it on my screen. He polled at 4%. That was actually down from 5% from a national research poll in late July, which in turn was actually down from 6% in the University of New Hampshire poll in mid-July. Now, again, we're talking about a point or two difference. All of these polls have a margin of error of like 4 or 5, 3 or 4 points.
But DeSantis is way down. Tim Scott's creeping up. Burgum's kind of stayed the same. So sitting where he's at, it's not bad for the second spot, but, you know.
Listen, if Trump, I still believe that Doug Burgum has a path. But I don't think that whether or not he can walk that path is necessarily something that he can control. Something has to happen with Trump. Either voters have to turn on him or he's disqualified in some ways because of his legal problems. I think that has to happen. If that happens, all of these candidates are within a few points of each other. At that point, it's anybody's race.
I have to think at this point maybe that's the play.
But as long as Trump's on the back,
smart to be holding back this much on what is clearly his number one obstacle in this contest,
for sure. But that we could talk about that more on the next podcast. Thank you so much for listening, as always. And I should say I heard back from Mark Simmons, and we're working on maybe getting him on for an interview. Next week, next Wednesday, I think that would be appropriate is have him on with Ben and I again, since Ben and I were the ones who did this interview today. So we'll work on that. Certainly want to hear from him. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.